So I guess to take a step back, so why did we do this? I think it's becoming easier than ever to test ideas in very lean ways, and so we wanted to really push ourselves to think about to think about how we can in very kind of cheap ways test a hypothesis. And in this particular case, Startupy is a curated information environment, and so we are building a curated search engine in many ways. But part of the thesis is also that as much as there are information today, the challenge is like organization and structure. There's also we still believe that a lot of information remains unshared, and that is the case because the business models and the incentives for writers have been such that people have been incentivized to publish on a regular basis, and it just rewards
coffee without.
it rewards people that publish consistently versus the people that have like real expertise that we felt we wanted. And so part of the strategy here was to test whether this crowdfunding model could become a permanent fixture for Startupy. So we, as you could see, like this was all very, very scrappy. We spent about 1,200 total, which we made back in like other ways. Like we, our first friends community grew. So it just goes to show how like easily you can validate things these days. And again, if anyone has specific questions about the actual no code setup, we're happy to answer them. I guess the one thing I'll say there is no code does not mean no learning, because it's definitely, these platforms are very powerful, but there's a big learning curve. And I'll skip through this part, but again, if anyone has any questions on the actual like mechanics of how we set this up, such that we didn't have to do too much work, we're happy to get into the nitty-gritty. And then, I guess on the marketing side, we didn't do much other than share on Twitter and launch on Product Hunt. But this tweet alone got over 200,000 impressions. And I think more than the numbers, what was exciting is the kinds of people that reached out to us. Andrew Chen, who's notoriously sits on this Substack board, I believe, and was their seed investor. Mike, who I think runs like some sort of product related to publishing on Twitter. So I think to me, what's exciting is that there's a lot of awareness and hunger for new models, and ghost knowledge is just one kind of potential variation. Again, this was a 1-week experiment. This is not fully updated. The numbers actually look much better now. The honor rate was about 96%, which is a pretty great considering there was nothing really binding people to honor their pledges, and that was one of our concerns. I think more so than the numbers, I think we're excited about the people that committed to writing. I think Andrea, for example, she was our most successful crowdfund, and the reason for that, to me, she embodies the perfect author for this kind of experiment, because she's up and coming and was able to rally her community. And I think, in the same way that Kickstarter is, when you put your project on Kickstarter, you're not expecting Kickstarter to drive the demand. The expectation is they're the platform and might, help in some ways, but you still have to drive the demand. I think it's very similar here, and that was one of the learnings is if you request something, like it's very hard for the platform itself to fulfill the crowdfund. There has to be an incentive, and like Andrea was tweeting about this left and right, and she really brought in like a ton of people. She ended up having over 50, 60 people pledged to her. So one of the challenges, I guess, with the experiment that we ran into is that because the author is not necessarily approving the prompt, the author is not necessarily incentivized the moment that the request comes in to share it. So I guess, yeah, I think that the big thing jumping into learnings is that, to me, that this project, like the success metric for this project is what I call request author fit, meaning the author is like willing, able, and interested in writing about, the requested prompt and then sharing it with his or her audience. In some cases, something was requested of an author, the author was just not excited about that prompt. We had, for example, Nadia Egbal, she wrote a fantastic book. There was a request for her. She wasn't that interested in the prompt, loved the idea. And she actually said, like, it'd be fun for me to like create my own bounty in the future because I'm interested in like new things that people may not know I'm interested in. So that was a recurring theme that came up, is why don't we let people set up bounties for their own work? We initially, in case it wasn't clear to everyone, we initially set 10% of the total proceeds of the crowdfund to go to the requester, because we felt like if the requester was incentivized to share it, then the crowdfund might meet the threshold or the goal more quickly. But it turns out that wasn't like a huge incentive. So yeah, so I think overall, it's interesting to think about letting authors set up bounties for their own work, almost like a pre-subscribe to kind of an essay they might not otherwise make time for. One thing we ran into a con actually is that people often know what topics they want to learn about, but they don't know who the right author is. So that's a lot more complex of an undertaking, but there is an opportunity to allow requests for topics and then for the community to, source the authors in some way. I think the other big question, which I'm super curious to hear from everyone on, is whether an essay is the right like unit of content. Like, some people said like, oh, maybe a Zoom chat with the author or a podcast, or, oftentimes like these authors don't write because they're not great writers, or writing is a high friction exercise. Personally, I think all content on the internet should be on demand. Like, I think a big flaw with the Clubhouse model is that if you're not available at 10 p.m. when the room is streaming, then you miss it. And I like the idea of like the content being available when you need it and it being more conducive to thought, which is why I like the async stuff. But there's certainly a question about what is the right content format. And then as far as the like incentives to pledge, it seems to me like this works best for content where a lot of people benefit, where like few people benefit a lot and are willing to pay like big money, versus like a lot of people benefit a little, right? So if you are like designing I don't know, content recommendation algorithm, then you'd probably be willing to pay Twitter's feed designer a lot of money. And to me, those like more kind of hidden, sort of secret intellectual corners of the world are what's more interesting and what gets far less attention and less coverage. So I'm more excited about models that unlock like specific knowledge. But yeah, that'd be something I'm super curious to hear others' opinion on. And then, yeah, I mean, I was actually surprised by how many of the authors are donating proceeds to charities. Like, in general, and again, this is a small experiment, not statistically significant, but money did not seem to be the primary incentive to participate in this experiment. So that's like pretty much what I've got. I'm curious yeah, I'm curious, like thoughts, reactions, should we run a season two? What would you do differently? Um, yeah, feel free to chime in.
I'm also going to throw out another question to those that you said, Sadi. Another question that we're really interested in is if you participated, what made you trust the initiative? If you can identify it, was it a brand being behind it? Was it the people associated to the requests or other pledgers? Sort of what made you, take time out of your day and pledge money to something that you found? So that trust factor is also something we're interested in.
So I'll jump in here just on that ask. I was a pledger. I pledged to Nathan Schneider's article request. For me, it was both that I know Nathan Schneider and that this type of product is kind of in line with uh, ideas that I've been kind of thinking about, and the product design and the way it was presented just kind of reinforced trust. I mean, it looked legit, so I was happy to pledge, pay, and go through the entire kind of customer workflow, I guess. And yeah, I'm sitting here because I'm excited about potential season two and seeing kind of where the evolution of this idea goes.
Awesome. Todd, what was the essay you pledged to?
It was Nathan Schneider.
Oh,
I forget the byline, but it was like what crypto can do for multi-stakeholder capitalism, if you
capitalism.
will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I'm curious, like, was that like, did you know who he was before? Did the topic just become interesting as you were exploring ghost knowledge, or what made you pledge to that one in particular? Like, do you have a specific affinity to that topic?
Yeah, I'm really interested in the topic. I've known Nathan for 2 years. I know he writes some quality pieces. So yeah, between the content, the topic, and ghost knowledge as a medium to support his work, it all just kind of came together.
Yeah, I can add to that as well because I pledged to two people I know as well. So it's interesting that I wasn't super compelled to pledge to people that I didn't, I wasn't familiar with or I haven't read their work, which I think is a challenge that you might want to think about, especially if you're going to help uncover talent that might not have written in the past, and who might not already have an existing audience or community reading their work. I think that was the biggest challenge for me when I was kind of looking at the product and thinking about who I wanted to pledge to.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people kept saying that when they thought of people to write about a topic, the people that kept coming to mind are the people that write often. Like Packy McCormick or Lenny, and part of the thesis it's let's get content from the builders, from the people in the trenches, not from the people who are like writing full time. Um, but yeah, one of the challenges is that you don't really know who those people are.
I
Hi.
think I think I can just so
No, no, no. Go ahead.
okay. So I can just add to what you just explained, Sari. So I kind of participated because I wanted to see this writing, this piece from Kuba. I backed Kuba's article about Web3 and what can be the future about it. And I was just listening like a lot about that. And then I just suddenly saw this whole concept about having like requesting pieces from people who don't usually write. And I felt like that is a real problem. And I really, really wanted to back that problem. Whether it was Coupa or not, like I think if I had found someone else familiar as well, I would have still backed it. So yeah, it was both familiarity and also like the alignment of the problem. So yeah.
I'm curious from the writer's perspective if any of them felt like would they like, were these ideas that they might have written about on their own eventually? Like, what was, it's like, curious about the feedback there. I understand that it has to be a topic that they're interested in. And it may not, certainly if they want to write about something new that they're not already known for, then that, there's no way to know that. But if you want to be like for Andrea to write about, curation as a service is like, do you think she would have done that anyway? I guess.
I think that's a great question. I think so. In the case of Andrea, she like explicitly said, like, I want to write about this. Like, can you request this on my behalf? So it was something that, like, I think if you would have asked one of her fans to request something, the language would not have been curation as a service, which is what she's excited about. So I think certainly like the authors know best in terms of like
Right.
what they want to write about. So I think that so and for example, in the case of Nathan Schneider is an interesting example because the prompt originally was write about how like liberals should embrace or how the left should embrace crypto. And he wrote to me personally, he's like, I love the project, but like, what if I don't agree with the prompt? The prompt is like, is a thesis in and of itself. And so, we worked with a requester to reword the prompt as like, how crypto can redefine stakeholder capitalism. So it's interesting that, the spirit of Ghost was like, let's give the power to the audience, not the author, but it's the author needs to be involved and should be involved initially in actually like from the wording of the prompt to the sharing of it in order for any of this to succeed.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on like the format of, like we went with an essay, but there and writing is a high friction activity for a lot of people. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on whether this would make any sense in a different format.
Yeah, I was thinking about like the podcast you mentioned earlier about lower friction. And I was thinking about like the author's incentive, like would one of their incentives also be to maybe potentially collaborate with somebody else on a particular topic? And I think a lower friction way would be a podcast, for example, as well. Like if there was a topic that was suggested and there may be an expert on, but maybe there's somebody else who has a counterpoint to that. I think it would be interesting to kind of to see a more nuanced take. And I think a podcast would be a lower friction way to do that.
As a pledge, somebody who's pledged in the past, I would absolutely pledge to a video, podcast, panel, audio, interview. Yeah. I'd love to see more medium, different types of medium, I guess, for interaction.
Yeah, I actually had a question too. Have you guys considered leveraging this as an opportunity to crowdsource ideas on what types of digital products that creators might actually want to create? Something like like new courses as a medium, potentially even like I run an automated coaching business for creators. So it's a really interesting idea for us to be able to identify specific subject matters that creators should be focusing on for their communities and kind of like pre-vet the ideas.
So I can say more about that. Would you imagine people requesting specific content from creators, or what do you imagine the interface doing differently?
Yeah, no, it's honestly, it would be the same interface, but leveraging it in the context of a new type of medium that would be created. So instead of it being an essay, and it could take the form of an essay, but essentially what our business does is that we look at existing creator content and then turn it into direct messaging to help people form better habits. So in the context of helping people form better habits, I think that being able to crowdsource what people truly want to work on and what they look to creators for might actually inform the creator of what type of content they really should be looking to create.
Hey, sorry, you also mentioned restrictions to the writing process. Do you have, I wonder if you could engage editors or or focusing copy that could assist the writer and reduce that friction of kind of the fears of starting an essay for those that don't frequently write essays.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. It's funny, I spoke to the team at Every, which is a writers collective publication, and they were like, "Oh, this is so cool. We should do this." But my bet is the writing is gonna suck if it's not, you know, people that are used to writing. Like their concern was the quality of the writing, and so you know we can't really comment on that yet. Although the people that ended up getting funded have written before. Like, you know, Eugene Wei is a perfect example of someone that doesn't write often, but when he writes, the quality is amazing. And I think that there was a request author fit in the sense that he just ended up like really connecting with the prompt that was asked of him. So we'll see about the quality of the writing. I do think text in general is a higher friction medium. But you know, but I'm curious, I guess, also not just the format of the content, but also synchronous versus asynchronous, and whether there's any benefit to, you know, like doing like pledging to any sort of like synchronous knowledge sharing. I think for Startupy, we like asynchronous, like I just think that the world has a lot of information, we just don't access it at the right times, and it's not conducive to thinking. And so, you know, I have a bias to asynchronous, like on demand knowledge, insights. But yeah, I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on like opportunities in synchronous versus asynchronous knowledge sharing. Yeah, Jad, you posted next question. That's an interesting platform. There's another one called Anyone, where you can literally just call, I guess, anyone and have a 5-minute conversation with them, and pay for that. I don't know, like what other models have you seen that you know that are interesting in this space? I'm curious if anyone has any kind of ideas, thoughts, interesting projects to surface.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that maybe the form, like maybe it's not text that's high friction, but essay as a format is high friction. You know, if it's just simply answering a question, I feel like that's much easier and less time consuming. So yeah, the next question example I thought was relevant. I was thinking about, you know, Quora as well. Obviously with Quora, you're not asking specific people for their answers, but if it's like if it's Quora, but you're targeting specific individuals, like how would that work, and how would that be different to, you know, this example, like the ghost work example that you ran? Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think because if I think about information that I want right now, and you know, you and I, we know each other. We're working on other, you know, internet projects. We are both really interested in DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. Have read a lot about it. But if we were to like want to incorporate a DAO today, it's still like there's still like a lot of things I need to learn to like actually practically, you know, like philosophically I understand it, but practically perhaps less so. And I also I'm a big believer in learning by doing. And so an essay is not necessarily the answer to like learning by doing. So for something like that, you know, like I almost would want to like screen share with Cooper Turley, and be like, hey, I know you like, you know, you did like a social token experiment for Friends with Benefits, the community you run, like, can you like screen share with me? And like, you know, I remember like the first time I set up a MetaMask and like somebody helped me out. So I guess it depends on the you know, the nature of the information you're seeking, and whether it's like insights, ideas, practical, tacit knowledge. Yeah, I'm curious, like Cameo for knowledge. I'm curious, like what, you know, to pull on that thread. What are like prompts you imagine succeeding there?
Yeah, I don't want to monopolize the conversation whatsoever, but just sort of to respond to that. I don't know, just a thought that came to mind. I think there's a distinction between, there's a lot of platforms where you can like ask an engineer a question and pay for 10 minutes of their time. And this I don't think is like that. It's much more, Cameo for knowledge would essentially be like asking superstars in tech or whatever, maybe like Mark Andreessen, like you could submit a question and like pitch in some money and it goes to charity or whatever. And he addresses the question, and that might be a little bit less like high friction. It's lower friction, just responding. Super peer is a great example. Yeah, I think that's sort of maybe a relevant example here. But yeah, just a thought exercise. Would that be easier? Would there be more frequent kind of submissions and responses, and then maybe the responder can select which ones they want to respond to. It's not just any prompt.
Yeah, super peer is really interesting. I think for it's still ghost knowledge, right? In the sense that a lot of knowledge happens like on a phone call, in an email. Like there's this Twitter account called Internal Tech Emails. I don't know if people have seen it. I'll drop it in the chat. But it basically is like leaked emails from tech executives, and I learned so much from reading those emails, and it just goes to show, how much of this stuff is hidden. And so, like with super peer, again, it's like you're paying $200, $500 for an hour of time with someone, and you're the only one benefiting from that versus other people. So I think a lot about like a model where like you have like patronage, but like the knowledge becomes a public good in a sense. So that, yeah, like to me, this idea of like charging for my time is interesting, but it doesn't really like I think create a new model for unlocking knowledge, in my opinion.
I think that's really interesting. I think two things. One is it depends on the, at least from this initial list. Like it seems like, I don't know, I'm not familiar with all of them, but I'm familiar with a lot with most of them. Like, what is their sort of native format? Like, are they normally writing a newsletter? Are they prolific, tweeters? Are they podcasters? And like, so it's probably speaks to, again, not just the topic, but like what if we know of them, why do we know of them? How do we know of them? Do we know of them because we listen to their podcast? Do we know of them because we follow them? Like, so that's sort of that kind of fit. I also think though, and this can be my own bias of just my own background, like I still think there is nothing like a written text to convey knowledge. I worked at Medium back in the day, and Medium's whole thesis, at least at that moment in time, was sort of, you don't have to write every day. That is actually a real, or every week. That's actually a really high bar, and most people, as we know, are not, for lots of reasons, are not able to do it. And also that there are a lot of different incentives for why people write. Some people, need it for money. Some people just want to have a place to share. Some people love particular writing tools. And like that whole idea, again, at least at the time, was that like the best ideas out there are probably not from the people we all already know who have those ideas. So how do you provide a platform in office to enable that? And I think probably, one of like the obvious learnings coming from there was like, it can't just be the platform, right? It's like, what is the other thing? And here it's like you're trying to build in that system of incentives. But I still think writing, I guess it's not about the writing per se, it's about what writing forces you to do, which is like think and clarify and your argument and express yourself in a way that is, I think, to what the goal of this is, to like really be transferable. And that's not to say that I don't love podcasts and all the rest, but I think for the goal of knowledge sharing, I still think that is probably an ideal format.
Hard agree. I guess one question I'm curious to ask people is, I obviously have a very biased perspective of what I think the knowledge gaps are based on areas that I want to learn about that, and some of those areas were revealed in the prompts that I seeded Ghost Knowledge with. But I'm curious, like, what are areas where you consider there to be like big knowledge gaps? Because a lot of people would argue that we live in the information age. You can access absolutely everything online. I, I would push back on that, and argue that the kinds of people that publish is a very specific subset of people. But I'm curious, like, what people here perceive to be like the actual knowledge gaps or areas where, you still feel like underserved in your kind of information environment.
I think to your point earlier, kind of that like second or third layer deep on actually executing something. I think it's coming up that there's like clearly some use cases to like bucket, whether it's an idea or it's operationally, but like you just mentioned, you're like, how do I set up a MetaMask? I actually don't know how to do that. And who can I call and where do I find the instructions for that if I'm not spending 3 hours on the internet like digging for it? So I think some of that like second or third layer deep, those kind of deeper cuts of the operators probably do have that knowledge because they've done all of that work and are sitting kind of with hundreds of hours behind them to inform like the quickest way to get at that information, or even just distilling it down kind of to Brent's point, in like a class or like some sort of surfacing of what else people need to actually be executing on these new ideas, especially if they're on the edge of something new like crypto or digital products or things like that. So kind of thinking about what those buckets of use cases could potentially be, and then are there kind of layers within those use cases that seem really interesting, if that makes sense.
I definitely agree. Like, I definitely agree with what Lauren is saying, in the sense that, like, crypto, for example, like there's a lot of information out there about crypto. Like you mentioned DAOs. I've like heard of DAOs, but it would be nice to have like a really inclusive introduction, like from the ground up, like what is crypto, and just one place where I can go to see that. And I want that for so many different things, because if I go on Google and type in like what is crypto, I get 30 million results in 3 seconds. Like there's no way I'm gonna know the right path to take between all those links. So, like crypto gardening, an introduction to Cezanne's best works. Like there's so many different things that an introduction would just be nice. And one ideally that's curated by someone that actually has knowledge of that space. An introduction by me for crypto is probably like no one's gonna read that, but an introduction from Vitalik himself, like that would be highly sought after.
I also think as you start to like experiment with this more, clearly there's a question of curation and trust. And that's like always the most exciting kind of edge to be pushing when you're a curator, is how do I get this audience to trust me, especially if I'm helping you discover things you don't know about. That's the whole point. So I think it also takes a little bit of practice, like exactly what you're doing to earn that trust. And I think over time, you won't necessarily need to attract these superstars or like have these kind of validations around whether they can crowdsource their own community to invest in these. Instead, you can have some of these superstars also recommend who are the people they're looking to, either internally or within teams or within peers, that have all this knowledge but have never sat down at a computer to write about it. And so maybe that's like kind of a next iteration, is like sponsoring of people or curators that are kind of in the weeds of operating or in the weeds of really thinking hard on some of these subjects, but are never really either the ones to step into the spotlight or the ones to sit down and actually publish about it. So that's just like another quick thing to think about too. But I think over time, like curation has so much to do with trust. And as you start to establish this as a place to discover that kind of knowledge, I think there's so much room to even do more and experiment more, obviously.
Yeah, I love that, Lauren. Thank you. Um, yeah, I guess another thread I wanted to pull on is like so much of the spirit of this is we went from ad-based business models for publishing to now thinking that subscription is this panacea. Um, and I personally think there's just like subscription fatigue and both on for the consumer, but also for the creator, the pressure and the expectation. I'm curious, just any thoughts, feelings people want to share on Substack and subscription fatigue in general.
Not to like dominate, but just to like riff for a second. Is there maybe an option of like, I give Startupy $100 and then each article or each thing I want to read is maybe $1 and I can choose how to invest that over time instead of this kind of unit of measurement around month or around, kind of time, if that makes sense. So I think sometimes like I might have a block of time where I can dive in for like a whole weekend because I have the opportunity to, and I might want to really like absorb a lot of information in that session. But subscriptions are very like it's by week or by month, and I think that can help for catching up on stuff. But is there a way to flip it on its head a bit of like maybe time isn't what the subscription is tied to, and instead you have like a pot of value that you can disperse as needed, as wanted, depending on what you discover.
I love that you bring this up, Lauren, because I think it also like speaks to the power of tools to shape our thinking. So much of like, now that I'm like full on in software development mode, the tools to build your like membership, like we are using Memberful, it's like annual, monthly, quarterly, it's based on time. What you brought up is interesting. I've also always believed philosophically that there's an opportunity for micropayments. For some reason, there's like this, it's like accepted almost that like micropayments have failed on the internet. There's some renewed interest that crypto might make it easier. But it seems like what you hinted at is perhaps like this idea of like micropayments for everything that you read. I don't know why it hasn't taken off on the internet, but I agree that we haven't been like very imaginative in thinking about subscription as like, monthly versus annual, because that's not really the way that people think about their consumption.
Yeah, on the spirit of, I guess, subscription and newsletter fatigue, I don't know if anyone else does this, but of all the newsletters that I'm subscribed to, I just end up reading like 3 or 4. And the rest I don't unsubscribe because I treat it as a sort of repository of trusted knowledge per se. And sometimes I'll find myself using the search I use Superhuman to like find certain keywords that I know someone of the writers that I subscribe to may have written about, and I reference that later. But I guess, I don't know if that helps, but curious to know if other people do or treat subscriptions not necessarily to actually consume what you subscribe to, but rather have it at your disposal whenever you wish to, right?
Yeah, I think I personally I subscribe when I find I'm reading like the paid articles often enough that like it's like a paywall basically. But I usually find stuff to read on Twitter or like somewhere else, and it just so happens that I tend to see that person's content a lot because they're people that I pay attention to anyway. So anyway, that's how I don't treat subscriptions as like a must read all of these, and so I don't tend to get lost in my inbox that often, because it's kind of crazy. Like it seems weird to me to think that even for an author that I have like a high affinity for their work, that I would want to read every single piece of work. Like whether something's relevant or not is going to depend a lot on the subject and that sort of thing. So that's how I approach it.
and also like your mindset that day. Like, you know, if an author that you like wrote a, you know, big post on like how to think about user interface design, like that just might not be relevant for you this week or on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. But again, like Gabe referenced earlier, as long as like you have a way to index it or search it over time, I don't know. So much of what I want to see on the internet is a shift from information that demands your attention to information on demand. But if you go to Substack, you can't even like search for keywords on an author's archive, because the internet is like designed for entertainment, not for thought, which is a different thread. But there's that.
Yep.
I was just in the Substack Reader beta version, and only then I actually realized that I subscribed to 50 newsletters, and I actually lost completely track of, I mean, I didn't realize that I subscribed to that many, and how much time is actually going into. And I think for me, like I start all the newsletter issues, and then it takes me really 3 to 4 hours per week where I block my time and I read through all of the newsletters. And I also saw a couple of my friends who actually have that super smart, have an email address only for newsletters. So every newsletter they subscribe to actually goes into that inbox, and then they have, you know, it's going back to that on-demand information. So they read the newsletters when they actually want to and when they have time to, in a separate space, which is not their email inbox they use on a daily basis, which I think is smart as well. And yeah, I started to subscribe to every as well, because I just like the collective of writers who's in there. And I would wish that there are, you know, more of these kind of collectives where I can just subscribe to a bundle of writers. I think that also takes a little bit less or the pressure of writers and the mental health and the risk of burnout, because as a creator you always have the feeling to, you know, perform and create. I think working then actually in collectives gives you kind of more flexibility and also time you can take off. So yeah, that's the newsletter fatigue.
Thanks for sharing, Jennifer. I also love every, and I agree. I think burnout is sort of this natural byproduct of the subscription model for creators, but it also means that the consumer ends up suffering because we're just force-fed information as a result of the business model, rather than like because the authors have something important to say. AJ, I know you wanted to hear a little bit more about the drop model. I'm curious, like, yeah, what specific questions you have on that, or anything else people want to hear about before we start to wrap.
Where I know I actually emailed you separately about this, but like, how has distribution figured into the conversation with writers or with the county?
Yeah, it's funny. So I guess two things that are interesting there. So Jared Dicker, who used to work at the Washington Post and now left to run the crypto fund at TCG. So, you know, he found that, like, he was on a podcast recently with Lee, and when he sent me the snippet where he referenced Ghost Knowledge, and to him, the most interesting part of the project is that it wasn't tied to a publisher. So, you know, typically you see these things from like Substack or Medium or the New York Times, but, you know, this is, there's the level of freedom here is very unique in the sense that it's like platformless. what we told writers is they can publish this wherever they want. Like, so like Eugene Way, he emailed me and he said, can I publish to my blog? And, what we are giving them, the email addresses of everyone that pledged to them, they can reach out to them. And it could be a Google Doc, it could be their blog. What we are going to do on our end is post all essays on Mirror. We just feel like Mirror is just like on the edge of experimentation. I think there's an opportunity for people to continue to support the collective of writers, but we're less interested in like where the information lives. It was like this, it has to be like discoverable, but it was like an afterthought for us, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So I just got a direct message from AJ. I know he'd written in the chat about the drop model and what else we're thinking of doing. So I guess what else we're thinking of doing. There's another drop in the works that is a little bit like out of my league in a sense. We in a totally different space, but I think one of the things that I think a lot about is this idea of like valuable real estate on the internet. So if you think about, in the physical world, what drives value is location. But in the digital world, there's like domain squatting. People invest in startups, and obviously startups that have valuable digital presences are worth more. But I started thinking a lot about this idea of like, can you buy valuable real estate in promising sites or newsletters early on? And can you use the dynamics of tokenization and crypto to kind of start to blur the boundaries between advertising, patronage, and so we're kind of pulling on that thread with this drop that we're imagining. But if you can imagine, like going on Startupy and seeing like a banner, almost like the New York Times, like old school banner ads, and you could buy a grid lot and of like your own ad space, and that each ad space was represented by an NFT, and you could buy and sell it, and so your ad could be worth more over time or less over time. So I just think there's an interesting thread on tokenized advertising, thinking about what like valuable real estate on the internet means, alternative ways of funding outside of like venture. So I guess the new thing that we're kind of working on is in that universe. And sorry if it sounds a little vague. It'll rest assured we will work on the messaging. What else?
I read this somewhere, and I'm curious to hear really overall group's thoughts. But do you think that the drop model is like an excuse to not actively work towards finding product market fit for a given product?
I think that the drop model there's like different drops have different objectives. I think in some cases it's just like pure marketing. So if you think about what, like, if you saw what Party Round did, I'll share a link. It's not like they're not really like drops around like the core product, but rather just marketing, like marketing gimmicks. So what, like at the end of the day, like the big game that everyone's like playing today is attention. And so I think that if you think like the drop, you could think of a drop as from a pure like marketing perspective, is like what things can you do that are like, loosely related to your core product, that drive like attention. And then there are like, for us, the Ghost Knowledge, in some ways it helps drive signups for or wait lists and attention to our core products. But for us, it was more, is there an opportunity to fold this general kind of thesis into the core product and make this a permanent fixture. So I think it's just a lean way to run experiments. And, I guess what I've learned is that it's not, the answers are never binary. It's like, oh, the answer is not like a yes or no. Do we run a season 2? Like we could, there's a lot of signals pointing to doing that, but again, it also diverts attention from other things. So I guess the short answer is, I don't know.
Sorry if this was in your deck, but how did you approach what was the design process like for this project? Like, did you had a rough idea, you kind of bounced some ideas off some people, hit a whiteboard? I mean, could you talk about that? Like, how did you make it happen, sort of?
Totally. Yeah, we were hoping somebody would ask this question, just because, it just gets to like the heart of like, how did we build something that, could be very complex to build, boil it down to basics. I guess we started with a constraint of saying we would only do this if we can leverage no code tools, because otherwise this would be like a big build. If we were to have to like integrate payments and do all sorts of things ourselves, it would just be very expensive. So we started with the constraint of, let's use Airtable as the base. And before we even designed the site, we were kind of designing like the fields and like the back end. Actually, Gabe, who was like instrumental in like architecting this thing, is here. So if you want to chime in, Gabe, with more details, you can. But essentially, like the site is a very basic like Webflow, and everything else is like Airtable embeds. So yeah, I think we like worked backwards from the constraints. And other than some no code experts that we had to kind of pay by the hour to help us troubleshoot some stuff, it was all very like low lift.
Yeah. I guess like in the spirit of, sharing more, and you talked about a drawing board. I'm going to share really quickly a snippet of one of our initial drawing boards attempts. Can you see my screen? Yep. So this is just a Figma page where we knew all the jobs that needed to be done. And by here, you can already see we had made the decision to use Airtable. And so the order of things is really important to how we thought about this. And knowing our constraints, we just tackled it in a very simple way, and then just applied a little bit of branding and color, better copy to it, if that makes sense. And as we showed people initial versions of this, it was really easy to integrate better like columns that were not there initially, or change them up, or change it. So it was extremely flexible to build and design. And when it comes to the automations part, something that I think it's valuable to know is there's a world where we could have done everything completely automated from the action that was taken in Webflow, but we purposely decided to take an approach where, let's say, 20% was automated from the action taken in Webflow, and 80% was controlled by us, because we had very little expectations and didn't know how people would react, and we wanted to be in control of messaging and when to take certain actions. So it was just a matter of clicking a button and triggering the automation. But I guess that layering of human control was key for us to, achieve certain timing that was, at this point, is impossible to know if it affected for a positive note, but we thought it did. So I don't know if this adds a little bit of light to your question, Lee.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thanks. And then a follow-up would be, like, coming off of building this, do you feel like is using no code tools like this to knock something like this out quickly, like a winning approach? Like, are you going to continue to do this? Did it feel like flexible and kind of like you were able to get what you needed to get done, and was it frustrating?
You want to go ahead, Sally?
I mean, the only thing I'll say is that what's amazing about no code is how you can react in real time and make adjustments so easily. You can add a column to the Airtable and, just like, in one click, present it. You can change the copy on Webflow. It's just like such a stark contrast to having, we have a parallel project where we manage offshore developers on Linear, and every little change is just a pain in the ass. And so I think it's very powerful. I do think that, the customization is limited. You have less control over the aesthetics and, so it depends, I would say, on the project. But what was amazing for this particular project is how we were able to react in real time and make changes based on like what we were seeing.
I would add that there were some trade-offs that we dealt with. One, someone asked a question about, or said something about having two authors collaborate on a single entity, whether it's video, podcast, or essay. And we actually, the initial designs and the initial automations and everything planned for two authors. We had built that, but then as the scope of the project increased, we were faced with a lot of limitations that were just due to the tools that we decided to use. And it's just a trade-off, right? So we just cut it off and had one author. And some of you may have experienced like small glitches, and they were due to that on the email, the way it was sent and stuff. But I guess we'll definitely continue to use no-code tools, and there's customization as well. I think we're becoming internally better at using them as well, and understanding them more, and making more out of them as well.
Yeah, if anyone's working on any no-code projects and need help, we're happy to be a resource as well. This was a learning experience for us, and we're happy to pay it forward.
Yeah, I need to jump, but nice seeing everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm happy to stick around for a couple minutes if anyone has questions. I appreciate everyone joining on this busy summer Thursday.